When I first started GMing regularly, there was one thing I kept hearing about over and over again: world building. Whether it was listening to YouTube or reading Reddit forums or just having conversations with other GMs I knew, this same topic kept coming up over and over again. World building, world building, world building. Why was it important for us to describe the intricate carvings of the Doric columns for 20 minutes? Well, it helped establish the world. Why are we straddled with this NPC that none of us like? Well, it really helps you guys feel the world building. Every time that I was a part of a session that felt like something was a little off, 9 times out of 10, it's because the GM spent a lot of times on their world building. Hi, I'm John from Incendium RPGs, and today I want to explore a question that I've been asking myself ever since I started GMing. Does world building really matter? Let's get into it. Alright, it's time for our subscriber roll-off. I'm using my influence action, contested by your insight roll. If my score meets or beats yours, then I've persuaded you to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell. Y'all ready for this? Wait, what is that? Ooh, a 14. If you rolled lower than a 14, welcome to the channel. About 9 months ago, I released a video called The 7 Baby Steps to Masterful Game Mastering. Originally, this process came about over on our podcast Dragon Mind, where my Borrowing Brilliance co-host Stephanie, inspired by Dave Ramsey's 7 Baby Steps to Financial Freedom, had asked me, in my opinion, what were the 7 baby steps to becoming an excellent game master. Well, like I said, when I was a new GM, the number one thing I heard about more than anything else was world building. And I mean, just look at the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. Part 1 is titled The Master of Worlds, and it's all about creating cosmologies and pantheons and settlements and governments. I mean, no wonder, it kind of suggests as the first part that world building is the most important part about running a successful D&D game. But upon reflecting of my most successful D&D sessions, I find myself wondering, how much did my world building actually matter? Especially when I considered the times I was getting most frustrated being a player. Alright, to answer this question, we first have to define what world building actually is. My favorite definition is from Wikipedia, and it reads, world building is the process of constructing a world, originally an imaginary one, sometimes associated with a fictional universe. I like this because a lot of other definitions of world building suggest that it has to be fantastical in nature, whereas to me, it's a lot broader than that. So for example, there is world building to be studied in a show like The Office, which is supposedly set in our reality, and although the events are fictional, the world, the setting of The Office, is built slowly over time. Beyond Scranton, we know that there's a branch in Albany and Utica, and the setting is not magical or fantastical in nature. But this definition is also really broad. So I guess in the TTRPG lens, to narrow our question a little bit, we could ask, how much does world building matter? That's still a pretty big question though. So rather than tackling it myself, I decided to interview several different GMs over on our podcast, Dragon Mind, to see what they had to say on the issue. And well, let's just hear what they had to say. Why does world building matter?
World building is necessary for immersion. When players have questions, as they usually do, about the world that they're going through, the world building that you've done up to this point will support your ability to be able to answer those questions.
I think world building gives you the opportunity to, as it as I guess as a content creator or a DM or a writer or what have you, the opportunity to share ideas with those around you. It's important from that perspective, just because it gives you some motivation to write. I feel like the folks who are interested in world building kind of in general tend to have a spark, and maybe I'm speaking for too many people, but like to draw satisfaction from having others experience that world.
World building can allow players to buy into reality, and it can also be very overwhelming if the players aren't versed in the source material. And that's why I do like a character discovery with my players. It helps characters participate and understand the world because they help build it.
Jaxn, what does the term world building mean to you?
A trap. Seriously, recently in the last year, my approach to world building has been more or less don't do it. I looked back on the games that I had really enjoyed and the games that I didn't really enjoy, both as a player and a DM. And one consistent thing that I noticed from my perspective anyway was that the ones that had the most world building, or at least the most hard world building, were consistently the ones that came up short on the player experience, or from the DM side of things, like the DM enjoyment.
In your opinion, why does world building matter?
So the answer that people aren't going to like is that it actually kind of doesn't. And you need to swallow that pill and face that fact. It doesn't matter as much as your plot and your characters.
Aggregating all of these answers, the conclusion I came to is it's complicated. Ultimately, I think this question is best answered by setting some other parameters. For example, can a play group commit to an agreed upon schedule? What is the length of each session? What style of play is the group excited about? More or less world building will be more appropriate given whatever the answers are to these questions. If your group has a difficult time sticking to a consistent schedule, maybe creating an in-depth world with a tight continuity is a lot to ask. If your group is really excited about immersive, cathartic storytelling and everything else seems to fit right, well, maybe some hefty world building can go a long way into helping them experience the most that the game has to offer. In my world building conversations with different GMs, one moment that stood out in particular was something said by Raymond O'Connor from the Running Off the Rails podcast that said the three main elements of storytelling were character, plot, and setting. And that of those three, setting was the least important. In my experience, it's the characters that matter most, then followed by the plot, and the setting as the last thing. So it's not that world building doesn't matter, it's just that a lot of times I feel it gets over prioritized in relation to the characters and the plot. And that's why in my 7 baby steps to masterful game mastering, world building is step number 4. The first 3 baby steps, running closed one-shots, running a multi-session story arc, and running a module or an adventure with a closed leveling progression, are there to give a GM space to really cultivate their skill in paying attention to their player characters and testing out different plot constructions, as well as testing their table's commitment to an agreed upon schedule. A lot of people love the idea of a regularly scheduled D&D game, but whether or not they realistically commit to it is a completely other matter. Okay, so a lot of GMs may agree, world building is not as important as character or plot, so why is it still such a revered topic? Well, my tentative theory is that among those 3 pillars, setting is the thing where they perceive they have the most control. I mean, if you're writing a novel, you get to make the decisions of the characters and you get to construct the plot. But in a TTRPG, the characters are controlled by other players. You have some control over the direction of the plot, but details can get randomly thrown out of whack due to the random result of a die roll. For the most two important storytelling pillars, a GM is mostly in a responsive state, meaning that they have to improvise narrations and adapt on the fly to the decisions of their players. And a lot of GMs are uncomfortable with this, which is why they spend so much time on the world building. That's the part where they really feel they have the most creative contribution. And in my experience, players don't really care as much about world building because to them, their world is their character. And even in the context of the story you're creating at the table, again, the characters are what bring that story to life. Okay, so I've been kind of ragging on world building for a little bit, mostly to get across the point that it's not the most important element of running a great game. But it still matters. So how can world building be implemented well? I find that world building is used best when it's used to deepen an audience's understanding of a character. Let's use a little out-of-the-box example. The Gohan goes to high school arc from Dragon Ball. Part of why I like this story arc so much is it's coming off of the heels of one of the most dramatic climaxes in Dragon Ball's storytelling, which was the end of the Cell Saga, where Gohan inherits his role as Earth's protector from his fallen father, and he goes through immense physical and emotional transformation. Fast forward 7 years later, and Gohan, this Super Saiyan that can literally destroy planets, has to try to fit in with a bunch of other teenagers. I believe a huge part of this arc's appeal is the fact that it takes place in such a mundane setting. We've seen Gohan, the Super Saiyan, in the context of world-ending stakes, smashing bad guys through rocks, firing energy blasts. So how do we deepen our understanding of his character? We put him in a situation where he's reluctant to use those powers. This arc has an interesting setting because it constrains Gohan's choices. It really plays up his kind of naivete with what it means to be human. There's this scene I remember where he jumps 30 feet in the air to catch a baseball, and then is like so proud of himself for not doing anything too superhuman. But of course everybody around is completely amazed by this. There are other times he has to make excuses to leave class to go transform into the Saiyaman in order to be a local superhero in town. And again, a lot of these story points would lose meaning without the context that the world building provides. But at the end of the day, Orange Star High isn't a well-built world. It's just giving us some sort of context of which to better understand Gohan. The story is still character-driven, but the world is an integral part to how that story is delivered. I guess the way I look at it is if your TTRPG is like a meal. Your characters are the food that you put on the plate. Your plot is how you cook and prepare them. World building would be the way you present it and the spices that you use. Without some seasoning or garnishes, it could still be a pretty good meal, but matching it with just the right seasoning and giving it just the right presentation can make a good meal excellent. And so, if you're someone that's really interested in world building, hold on to that love. Do your creating, make as much details as you want, but don't mistake your world building for GMing. If you're a GM, really make sure that your players are enjoying playing their characters and enjoying the general unfolding of the plot. Once you've nailed down that relationship, that's when you can start slowly introducing the background continuity of your setting as more and more context for your TTRPG storytelling. So now I want to know all of your thoughts. What are your opinions on world building? Do you think that world building is more important than I give it credit for? Or have you had experiences like mine where a GM over-prioritizes world building and it ends up being kind of a boring game because of it? Let us know in the comments down below and have an awesome day, everybody. Bye-bye now.